Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank our witnesses again today. I want to follow up on Mr. Barr's line of questioning here. Ms. Tong, in your testimony, you say that the CCP, we have helped to feed the baby dragon of the CCP until it has grown into what it is now. You know, I always use a little bit different phrase, and I often say that we're investing in China, which is the lion that's going to eat us if we're not careful. You know, Mr. Paul, in your testimony, you stated that the CCP has sought to accomplish its objectives by drawing in American investment in technology. They are sucking us in. They're finding a way to attract our investment. And Mr. McMaster, or General McMaster, you in a statement before the Senate Armed Services Committee in a hearing in March 2021 discussed the many Chinese companies that are listed on the American Stock Exchange. And my information was that in 2020, there was about 1,000 companies listed on our stock exchange, whereas of January the 9th of this year is down to 252. I think one of the reasons probably is that we said that they had to be audited every 2 years. I'd like to see that go down to 1 year. That's something I think we're going to be looking at. But one of the problems I have with it, and I think Mr. Pollinger mentioned a minute ago, is that our asset managers, when you have BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, who probably a bunch of us in this room may have our retirement funds with them, makes a statement that says the best place to invest in the next 20 years is China. This is very concerning because all of you this evening have made the statement that we've got to stop investing in China. We have to decouple our investments so that we can slow down their rate of growth so they can compete with us. And yet here we have one of our largest, the largest asset manager in the world that says that's where we need to put our money. How do you suggest that we deter him? This is where my colleague was going a minute ago. How do you suggest we deter him from saying that and investing in China? Mr. Pollinger or Mr. McMaster, one of you two want to take that question?
Sure. I would just say that American companies, by and large, are quite law-abiding. They have large compliance shops to make sure that they're compliant with the law. I think that companies will follow the guidelines if they are painted brightly, and that is the work of this committee. It's incumbent upon the executive branch to have executive orders that make clear what the left and right lateral limits are for what we can invest in, sir.
Mr. General McMaster.
Congressman, thank you. I think the way to do this as well, to maybe inform your work, is with case studies. And we're working at the Hoover Institution on case studies that will illuminate how U.S. investments, private equity and venture capital investments have enabled the People's Liberation Army in some circumstances. For example, some massive several $100 million investment in a company in 2014. That company now provides all the battlefield artificial intelligence for the People's Liberation Army. And also how our investments have enabled really the Chinese then to double down on state support for certain sectors that then drive our industries out of business. You mentioned battery manufacturing, you know, wind turbines, solar. I mean, the list is vast. So I think that really shedding the light on this is important because I think so many fund managers have been under this idea of you know, maybe, you know, some sort of soft-headed cosmopolitanism or a belief again in this assumption that China is going to become just like us.
Thank you for that. I want to make a point here, though. It would seem to me that, you know, I read somewhere the other day that it takes about $300 billion a year for them. I think, Mr. Pollinger, you mentioned something about the cost to deter and incarcerate and surveil the Chinese people. It costs about $300 billion a year, a figure I saw somewhere. If you look at our trade deficit, that's $383 billion. I think that's in Mr. Paul's testimony. So basically, we're paying through our trade deficit for the Chinese government to surveil and incarcerate and build detention centers, prisons, for their own people. Was that a fair statement?
I think it is, sir.
A question for you then. I know you gentlemen have talked about ways to perhaps legislatively do this. I think we also need to have the American people behind us when we do this. We need to have them understand that they can't necessarily go for the highest return on their investment in China. They're going to have to start looking someplace else. So how would you recommend we sell that to the American people? Ms. Tong has got a fantastic story there to tell of what goes on in China today. Would you guys like to answer that very quickly?
Well, in 1990, China's GDP was less than 5% of the US GDP. In 2022, China's GDP is 62% of US GDP. Over the last 3 decades, with easy access to Western markets, Wall Street capital, cutting-edge technology from Silicon Valley and the American universities, and also business and manufacturing know-how transferred or stolen in joint enterprises, China has now become a pacing geopolitical threat to the US. In hindsight, American policymakers should regret much of this. Sacrificing American values and principles for short-term profits will never serve Americans' long-term national security or economic well-being.
Thank you for that statement, Ms. Tong. And I yield back. My time's up.